All right, we're back, and it's COMP1073, client-side scripting in the winter 2016 semester. It's week 12, part 2 of our broadcast, where we last left off. We had to put together this element, and notice that it shows next frame. Let me just refresh. Now it just shows initialization. I took the console.log away from the animation loop, so that way it doesn't keep showing the frame, because it would just keep going forever, like you saw. Another change that I made is that I moved my references to canvas and stage inside the global namespace here, inside of my closure. Now remember, even though I say global, it's still part of this immediately invoked function expression, which is really a closure, which means it's not really exposed to the rest of my project. It's inside this project. So when I say global, I mean available to anything that's inside this file, right? As opposed to anything outside the file. If I didn't have this closure here, this structure here at the top and here at the bottom, it'd be available to anywhere in my project, anywhere, right? And that's good, but it's also bad in that if I wanted to create variables with the same names for some reason or another, they would clash, right? Which is what we want to do. We want to try to encapsulate or hide my variable declarations and my code inside this immediately invoked function expression, so that way you don't see any side effects of using or declaring variables and objects inside these spaces. Okay, so we've kind of declared our stage. That's what we've done. It's empty. Let's do something more exciting than making an empty stage. There are other pieces of our API, right? So if I go back to our easel.js, I'm always going to refer back to this thing. I'm not going to draw a circle here, but I want to start with something a little simpler. I want to start with something like a text file, like a text object. So if I look at the text class, right, here's what it looks like. I declare a text object, right? I say it's a new create.js.text object, and it's listening for 3 different inputs, 3 different parameters. One, the string that you're going to output, hello world. Second thing is the font and the size of the font, right? And the third thing is the color. That's what it looks for. Okay, that's cool. So that's the first thing it does. Second thing is, once I create the object, right, what I want to do is I want to add this to the stage. I'm going to show you how to do that. So let's do this exact example here. I'm going to type it in. You can go back here. And I need another place to type stuff in. I need another place where things are going to run after I've initialized my application. Here's my web app that we've created, right? And after my animation loop is running, I want to kick off another function where I have all my code, right? A really good practice is to call this function something like main or app or something like that. So we make another function that's going to be called from within the init function we haven't defined yet, and we're going to kind of put it down here near the end of our code here, and this is where all of our real code, quote unquote, is going to exist. This is just setup, this piece, right? And our real stuff is going to exist in another function down here. Let's make the function first. So let's going to call this thing, do it in the reverse order this time. We'll call it function. We'll call it main. Here's our main function. This is where all the magic happens. I'm going to put that in there as a comment, actually. So I'll say, this is where all the magic happens, right? Because basically all the magic happens in this function. You're going to define it here. But we haven't called this function yet. We need to do that inside of our init function. So as soon as we've done setting up the ticker and initializing all the stuff, we've done all this stuff up here, we want to be able to call this main function. We're going to do that down here. We'll say main. Right? So call the main function. That's what this is going to do. Right? So we call it here. And we defined it here. All I'm doing is I'm breaking up my code a little bit. I mean, I could put all of it inside my init function, but it'll get too messy, right? It'll be too much inside of my init function. I want to break it up a little bit, and this is how I can do that, by creating another little component that I can put my stuff inside, or another container, if you will, that I'm going to call. Okay, so here's my main function, and I want to do this stuff. I want to kind of create an object for my text. Now I could do var, I could declare the variable in here, but there's a problem with that. If I ever want to animate this thing, that object has to be available inside my animation loop. But the only way my animation loop is going to be able to see that object if it's in the global space. for now, right? So first what we want to do is make a variable up here, right? We don't want to declare it up here. We just want to make the variable up here so it's accessible inside of my animation loop or anywhere else we want it, okay? I'll show you the difference, right? So let's say if we declare it in here. If I go var and I call this thing something like hello label, make a hello label, and we'll make it equal to a new create.js.text object. And inside my text objects is looking for three things. It's looking for the name or the text that's going to go inside my label, so hello world, right? The font that's going to go on my label, which is, I don't know, we'll make it a silly font like Consolus, right? So we'll kind of do a 40 pixel Consolus, right? And we'll give it a color of black. So hash, 000000, black color, right? Pretty simple. So that's our object we've made, but we've made it inside of our main function. Remember when we talked about scope? This hello label object lives and dies inside of this object. It doesn't exist anywhere else. If I hover over hello label, it tells me that it's of type create.js.text. So it detects what the new object is. Now we haven't added it onto the stage yet. All we've done is created the object. And these are the steps involved. First, I create the object, load it up with all its properties that I need, and then I add it to the stage with the addChild method, okay? So that's number one. Let's do this, add it to the stage. We'll say stage.addChild, and then we're gonna reference the hello label, right? Hello label. So we're referencing the global stage object. This is the stage object, which we defined up here inside of our global variables. Here's my stage object. And just think about the stage object as a display list or a container for all of the other objects in our application, right? In our Canvas application. And what we're saying is take the hello label object and add it to the stage. When we add it to the stage, it actually displays on the stage itself. Here's a question for you before you go on. Where do you think this hello label is going to be displayed? I haven't told it anything. So where would it be by default? What would you think? Take a guess.
Top left.
Top left. Why? Because in computers, right? When we start doing things like X and Y coordinates, right? So the 0, 0 point, let's just say, if you who remembers Cartesian math back in the day? If you look at geometry, right? X and Y on math is the bottom left corner of your grid, of your graph, right? That's on math. But in computers, it's actually the top left corner. So the top left corner is 0, 0. And the reason why is because we draw X to the right and we draw Y down. We don't draw Y up. We don't render the screen from the bottom up. We render the screen from the top down. And so therefore the top left corner of the screen is where we start counting. We start counting the 0, 0 mark at the top left corner, okay? So if that's true, this hello label, if we did it right, is going to appear in the top left corner of the screen, okay? Also, we also have something for this object called the registration point. Who knows what a registration point would be? If you guys have done any kind of drawing with Photoshop or with Fireworks or other programs, Illustrator, think about the registration point as the focal point or the point of rotation, if you will, the pivot, right? So the default pivot point or registration point is also the top left corner, right? That means when I reference this object and I say X is 0 and Y is 0, I'm talking about the top left corner of this object itself. So the object itself has a local geometry, a local X and Y coordinate system, and then we have the global coordinate system of the entire canvas and the stage, which is top left corner. I can change the registration mark of my objects. Okay, let's see what I get. So I want to go here, and I want to look at my app, and if I refresh, then I get this big hello world, massive hello world in the top left corner. How come it's so big? This isn't 40 pixels, right? And if I look at I'm at 100%, but it's massive. Why is it so massive? And if I actually stretch it out, it even stretches out more. How come? Even though I've made it 40 pixels, what's happened is because I've made my stage width a relative unit of measure, so 100%. What it's trying to do is trying to take up 100% of my stage with the 40 pixel count. So the pixels in this particular case don't matter, right? This is kind of good and bad. I mean, I'm making it pixels. What if I, instead of using pixels, I use something like ems? right? Would that make a difference? Can I use ems with Create.js? I mean, if you're part of the the CSS world, and then how many ems is 40 pixels? And of course, if you don't know that number, if I go pixels to ems, pixels to m, there's actually a website, and notice that the default pixel size for ems is 16 pixels unless you otherwise specify, right? So if I want to say I want to make it so it's 40 pixels, and when I convert it to ems, it's going to be 2.5 ems. So I can let's say if I can use 2.5 ems instead of 40 pixels, right? So it's a relative unit of measure as opposed to a fixed number. See if that makes a difference. By the way, it won't, but just FYI, we'll see what happens. So let's try this out. So 2.5 em, and then save it. Go back to the screen and go to over here, refresh, and same, pretty much, right? Why? Because the way the stage works is it's relative to the size of my canvas. And because my canvas says 100%, it's going to try and take up as much of this thing as possible. And this is where we get back to this idea of relative units compared to absolute units. Yes, I would love for my stage to be an absolute amount, right? But what I really want to do is detect the size of my window, right? And I want to do something like a window.inner width, something like that, as opposed to a percentage. I don't know if you know what I'm talking about. And I want to do it with my JavaScript as opposed to my my CSS in this particular case. Let me show you what I'm talking about here. So if I go back here to my CSS, in my CSS I specified width of 100%, but 100% of what? It doesn't have a number, right? It's not a concrete number for JavaScript to latch onto. So let's get rid of this. If actually, let me change this back to a real number. Let's change it back to 640 pixels, right, for now. I'll show you what the difference is. If I go back to my code, app.js, and if I change this, instead of back to 2.5 em, I'll go back to 40 pixels here for a second, so you can see pixels and pixels, right? And if I save everything, right, let's say file, save all, to show you what it looks like, and if I go back to here and refresh, you're going to get a pretty skewed image. How come? Why is it so skewed, right? Based on the fact that, it's 40 pixels, right? And I've changed the size of my grid back to this size. How come? Right? Again, keep in mind what we're trying to do here. We're painting a canvas. This isn't text. I can't highlight this text. See, try and highlight it. Can't do it. You can't touch it. Can't do anything about it, right? So that's a problem, right? Here's the other thing. If I want to inspect this element, notice that I have nothing in here. If I want to look at sources for a second, and if I look at scripts, right, and if I go to my app.js, notice that my app.js is inside of an IFI, right? So if I do something like, I don't know, I call this thing hello label, so we go back, or stage, let's go back out to my console. If I go something like stage, you would expect that I can get access to it, but in fact, stage is not defined. Stage is not defined because my stage is inside of an IFI. If I want it to be exposed here on the console, I need to return it. Let me show you that. So if I go back to here, and down the bottom here, I can do something like this. Inside my IFI, I can use a return statement, return, and I want to return a reference to my stage object. So return stage. When I call my IFI, right, I want to return my stage object, which is a global object right now. My global object is a reference to stage, right? And let's do some troubleshooting with this, if this is possible, right? So how do I do this? I go back to my code, refresh, and if I go to stage for a second, do some troubleshooting, press enter, I still get an uncaught error. What the hell? I should have access to it here. Why am I not getting it? Here's something that happens weird when I use Create.js inside of a server like this. Sometimes what happens is I get stuff cached, right? And what I want to do, I'm just letting you know, because we're using a canvas element to draw stuff on. Sometimes it's better to use the local, to make sure that we're doing it in incognito mode. So let's just try that to make sure we can discount some of this stuff. So we'll go new incognito window, and inside here we'll say localhost 8080 to see what we get. Good. This is good. We're still getting the same result. Inside the bottom, inside my console, again, if I try to access stage and I press enter, still get nothing. right? The stage, even though I've defined it and I've returned it, nothing. Why? Because I'm still inside this element that I'm getting right now. Let's go back. Let's try one more thing. So I can return it this way, but what if I return it as an object? Can I do one of these? So I want to return, something called stage, which is a reference to my stage. Can I do this? Right? I want to return an object that's going to return stage. There's a difference here. One, I try to return a reference to the object itself. The other one, I'm returning an object with a key value pair. The key would be the name, stage. So I've named what my stage is. And the second is my value, which is the actual stage itself, which is defined up here. Right? Key value pair. And I'm returning this to the console. Let's see if that works. Stage, go back here, refresh, go down here, type stage, press enter, still nothing. The reason for this is because we're using this encapsulated format, okay? We're using an encapsulated format. Let's try unencapsulating everything and taking it out of the IFI altogether to see what happens. So if I take it away, if I take the IFI away, you'll see that this piece here, up here, disappears in a second. Watch. These are side effects of trying to use jQuery alongside with a Canvas element. So let's just comment this out. So I'm just going to kind of put this in here in a comment. So I'm taking the IFI away for a second, just to see the effects of what we're doing. Might as well take away this effect too, just because this doesn't make any sense in its regular scope. We're just troubleshooting here, right? Okay, let's see what we get now when we do this. So all we've done is commented out the IFI, the top and the bottom, and now I have unrestricted access to global namespace to everything else we have. So stage should be available enough to us, yeah? Let's try this out. So save, and I'm gonna go back to this thing, refresh, back to normal. Still got initialization, still got my nav bar, so no effects. And if I go stage, enter, I get access to my stage. I'm returning stage out of my IFI, right? And let's take a look at something else. If I open this up, I can see that the stage has a bunch of properties. And if I look at things like my canvas, do I have access to the canvas element? Well, here it is. Here's my canvas element right here. So my canvas element tells me how big it is. 38. How come? That's not what I said. My width and my height shouldn't be flexible like this. It's not 100% anymore. So what happened? How come it's giving me a client height of 478 and a client width of 638? What's going on there? Here's my height. It says my data set is my DOM string map. There's a bunch of other information here that I've got. My offset. Here's my offset width is 640. Here's my offset height is 480. This is good. This is what I'm looking for right here. I've got reference to my body index. Here's my offset parent, my body, which is the body that contains everything else. What else? Why else could this be weird? I've also put my canvas inside of my Bootstrap stuff, right? So remember, we have other CSS going on here, right? We can't control. Doesn't matter. That border won't be really affect. This is way too big. This is not 40 pixels, right? That's what I'm trying to say. So how do I fix this thing so make it so it looks like 40 pixels is what I'm trying to get at, right? So one is let's do some more removal. We have to do some troubleshooting. We'll put everything back in a second. But I'm just doing this is how I do my troubleshooting when I look at some of these things, these elements. Right? So go back to my index.html, and I notice that in my main container, I have my canvas. Let's take my canvas out of my container for a second. So let's remove this just down here. So there's no container. There's no other. My Bootstrap isn't going to affect my canvas now. Right? It's going to be to the left. It's going to be right to the left of my stage. Let's see what that does. So I'm just kind of eliminating issues, right? Refresh. See, so it went right to the left, and still my stage has got a problem. What else? What else could it be? Let's specify here. If I go back to instead of CSS, again, we're trying to guess how to use this thing, right? So instead of CSS width and height, let's take this off, and let's go back into my element inside my index.html and specify it inline, which is again this is the way we troubleshoot, right? So we go width, and we'll put it all back. Width is equal to 640, and then height height is equal to 480, right? We already have that information, but just to say, here's how it is, right? Actually, it should be 480, no pixels. Let's try that out. Thank you for that. If I go back to this and refresh, this seems to fix it. This is 40 pixels, not the other one, right? So did I use the wrong notation? I used pixels instead of 640 and 480 for my width because I assumed my canvas was the same as any other element, right? Canvas isn't. Canvas is kind of a weird thing. Canvas is the drawing area, right? So let's go back and fix it now. So let's go back to CSS. Again, this is all troubleshooting, right? So we're going to get rid of all this and go one step at a time. We'll backtrack one step at a time to fix our problem. So here we'll put this, instead of pixels, we'll use our width of 640 and our height of 480, but we won't use pixels, right? And inside my index.html, right, I've wiped this away, saved it, and let's go back and see what the changes are now. Refresh. Whoa, what happened here, right? I'm just letting you know. I'm telling you how this works, so you understand. So you're not freaked out about this thing, right? So CSS is a nice idea for width and height, but truly we can't do it with CSS in this particular thing, not the same way. So this way we need to use JavaScript to set up our width and height of our container for Canvas. All right. For other containers that you're looking at, no, you're shaking your head. It's just the way it works, right? Let's go back because this is our issue. Right? So the good thing is that it maintained our pixel size. We won't do it here. We'll leave just our border in here. What I want to do is I want to add an attribute, right, to our canvas with jQuery, right? Let's do that. So we're going to use our jQuery. I told you we're going to use all our skills for this one. So just like we did attribute here, body attribute ID, we're going to do body attribute width and body attribute height, and we're going to set our height and width dynamically with jQuery in here. So we've made a reference to our canvas, and inside our canvas, we're going to do something like this. We're going to say, we're going to target our canvas element, right? Actually, yeah, okay. It's just targeting it again. Here's our canvas element. We need to use it. What we're going to do here is we're going to say something like attribute, right? And we're going to do two things. We're going to target the width attribute, and we're going to assign a value of 640, right? And we're going to use our canvas to assign an attribute of height to 480. Just giving you a fixed number first. Let's try this out. Save. Refresh. This is good. Maintain our 40 pixel size. All right, that's nice. I like this. But remember what I really want is I want it to be this whole page size. So instead of instead of 640, can I go back to using 100% inline? So instead of 640, I want to go 100%. Can I do that? I got to be careful here, because remember, this is not the same as a regular element. So putting it out there, refresh, no. Right? Because Canvas doesn't understand 100% inline from an attribute perspective. This isn't, what should we call it, a CSS type of world. This is an exact number kind of thing. So that's one thing we can't do. We can't do 100%, right? So this is one way. We can use an attribute to set the canvas, all right? And we can set it by 640 by 480. That's one way. How about another way? We know we have access to the canvas element, right? And I want to specify the width. Can I do another way? Can I say something like canvas, because we already have a reference to it. And then I want to say something like, I want to look at width. And there's a bunch of different things that kind of sidle up with width, right? Client width, offset width, scroll width, right? Can't do just a width, right? So it's just the only thing I have is scroll width, client width, and offset width, right? So I want to actually affect the client, the canvas element. And if I say client width, right? As in a client width is equal to, and I set it to something. Example would be 640, right? I press enter. Let's see what I get there. Just 640. Who cares about the height for a second, right? So we're messing around with understanding height and width here. All right. Fresh. Oh, that didn't work. Right? So that doesn't work like that. Definitely not working that way. Right? Okay, let's keep trying. Right? So client width isn't the one. What about other things? Can I do in other ways? Like, for example, if I say, if I start typing inner HTML, I don't have inner width. And if I type width again, I only have offset width. Let's do offset width is equal to 640. Let's try that. So again, specifying a number. I'm not putting it in quotations. You know, those kind of things, right? So refresh. Nothing. This isn't the way, right? So it looks to me there's two possibilities. To be fair, I can use a fixed number, a fixed width that I use for the canvas element, right? I could do it that way, right? I could make it so I can use the style element. I gotta be careful when I use the style element though, because it messes things up, just letting you know, right? I could use the style element inside or the style method inside my JavaScript to style it just like I would with CSS, right? So something like this, I could do something like, but once I start using style, like canvas.style width, and I can make that something like the window width, right? So I can simply like window.inner width. I know that I can get that with the whole inner width of my canvas, right? That's my style.width. But remember, inner width may not be the answer, so I'll show you that because we may have to convert this to a string. Let's try this out. That brings it back, but it's this big, right? Which is not good, right? It takes up, it's a special thing. And when I go window.inner width, what does this give me? Let's see what it gives me in my console. So console.log window.inner width. I want this, right? So let's just see what I get here. Effect 1224, but that's not a string. That is a number, right? And I'm looking for a string to attach to my object. So I have to, maybe if I convert it to string, I get an actual value, right? So let's do window.log, and if I go something like toString, see if that works a little better. So toString, so converting that to string, refresh. Still, it's okay, still the same. So 1224, looks like I'm trying to convert it to string. That doesn't do anything. And what if I make it window width plus the number of pixels? Because remember, maybe it doesn't know, style.width doesn't understand what that is. It has to be in pixels or ems or something, right? Remember, I can use percentages too, but I highly recommend against it, right? So maybe what I need to do is inner width, right, plus pixels, right? So that'll convert it to when I do a plus, I concatenate a number with a string, and then the end result is a string. Let's see what I get now, right? Massive, but also massive, right? It's relative. This unit becomes relative. Hello world loses its face, if you will, and it stretches it all over. I'm just showing you what it does so you understand Canvas. Otherwise, you're going to be confused if you ever try this on your own, right? So what we really need is fixed attributes. Right? Oh yeah. It'll stretch it. It won't skew it. It'll stretch it to fit the whole width. So it is the whole width, but it's massive, right? Now you could rescale. You can make it so that instead of 40 pixels, I can reduce it or whatever. And if I used ems, so instead of pixels, I have to reduce this because this is in pixels. This is a pixel count, so I have to convert it from this to ems and then use ems. I could do that. But this, obviously, style using CSS doesn't work for Canvas, no matter what you do. FYI, right? So we need to go back to that attribute base. And if I'm going to do attributes and it's going to be a fixed attribute size, I might as well put it in my index. We're going back to my no inline styling. And actually, Margot asked me this at the beginning of class. She goes, Tom, are you sure, not now, but almost the very first day, she goes, are you sure you never use inline styling with this stuff? And the answer is mostly now, right? But there some places where it's just easier, right? Because it's always going to be the same canvas size. If I want to modify my canvas size from in here, I can certainly use JavaScript to do that. And remember, I can also use, instead of jQuery here, I have access to my canvas element, so I can do canvas.attribute or set attribute, right? And in my set attribute, I can do the same thing I did before. I have a string and a value, so my attribute is width. And my value here is the value of what I want. And in here, I can put in my window.inner width, right? Like this. So I can say something like window.inner width for my attribute, right? I'll be careful when I do this, window.inner width. If I do this, this is a lot different than what I did before, right? Refresh. See, that's what I really wanted, right? And what I'm doing is I'm poking it in. I'm actually injecting it into my HTML through JavaScript. I'm saying get that actual attribute, create a new one called width, and then attach the window width right to it. That's what I'm doing, okay? Now here's something that I want to do. I don't want the entire window width. I want a little bit of play on both sides, right? But would that be fixed, this window.inner width? Would that be fixed if I put this? I'm asking you a question now. It's not rhetorical. I'm asking you to see what you think. If I put my canvas element now inside my container, which is remember I'm putting everything back in place again, right, to fix it. So here's my canvas element inside my main content, my container. Would that be fixed if I put it inside my container? Remember, this is a Bootstrap container. Bootstrap gives me margins on the left side of my canvas, right? Of my page. What happens to this thing now if I refresh? Yeah, it does on this side, but over here it's outside the screen because it's a fixed number. It's not how big it is, right? So what I really want, I don't want the entire screen. I want like 80% of the entire window width, right? Like a 0.8. Let's go back. So here's my my code, and where I say window.inner width, what I really mean is window.inner width times 0.8, something like that. So I get a 20% play on both sides. Now you can be more specific. You can play with this number a little bit more, but if I want to make the whole size of my screen, and there's other ways you can do this to make it different. But if I refresh now and go back, you can see that I've got a little bit of margin on this side plus a little bit of margin on this side. And now that I know how big this thing is, I could push it over with some class. I can manage this a little bit nicer. Still not quite 100%, if you notice, right? Right. I can do different ways, right? So I can do that. But I still have control of my little banner that I'm going to make, right? This is what I'm doing right here. Notice that I don't have a size for my height, right? My height of the container isn't contained. I haven't mentioned anything. Let's do that. But I'm going to set up a standard height. So I'm going to say canvas.setAttribute. And we'll say height. And we'll set up a fixed number for this one. And we'll set it up to something like, let's say for now, we'll make it 480, just so that way we have a value. Same as us actually injecting it on the actual HTML. We're doing it with JavaScript. So there's 480. We have lots of control now again. Back to control, right? We have control back. Yay. Let's encapsulate everything in the IFI, right? So we don't want to take it out of the IFI. That was just for troubleshooting, right? So let's go back to the IFI, put this all back into place, because we always want to contain everything in our IFI to protect the rest of our application. We don't need this either, so we can get rid of this. And we're going to get rid of this, right? And we're in our IFI. Let's test it again. So make sure that the IFI is back. It still works. Yes. If everything's nice, right? And here's a good thing. If I make it 80% of my width, I know that this thing is 80% of my width. That means I have 20% left over, 10% on the left side and 10% on the right side, right? If I want to. So now what's happening here with my container object, right? My container, which is a Bootstrap container, is it's actually giving me a fixed number of units here, right? When I use container. So let's not use container inside my index.html to center everything. Here's my index.html. Let's not use my container object. Let's make a new class. Well, actually, it's a canvas element, so let's just get rid of this for now, right? And in my canvas element, for my CSS, this is where we can say, well, you know what? My left margin is 20%, right? Kind of thing. How do I do that? So I go margin dash left. Can I put 20%? Is that possible? Or do I have to put like a fixed number? Is this okay? Huh? Let's try it. Not 20% is too big. Sorry, 10% is what I want. This is 80% of what my window width is. It's okay, but the problem is that we're not quite centered. There's still something else going on here on the page, right? It's not quite 80% of my window width. It is. It's adding everything together. That's why, because remember in the box model, everything is additive, right? So that's what it's kind of doing. Sorry, say that again. Auto zero, right? Okay, so zero auto, right? So remember, is the order of the box model is top, right, bottom, left. That's the order, right? So top and bottom first, 0, right and left is what you want, 100%, right? So if that's true, if I go 0 auto, right, it's going to take the remaining amount, right? Top right, top bottom. No. But if I'm only using 2 units like this, it's top bottom, right left. What's that? Margin, yeah, that's what it's supposed to be, margin. Okay, and if I refresh, pretty good. Still something going on over here. Right, back to what we were before. This is actually what Bootstrap uses. Right? I'm just saying because Canvas elements are messed. Just from a moving around perspective, you have to understand how things work, so you're not messed up, right? Here's something. What if we combine them? What if I said my width for my canvas, going back to this, my width for my canvas is 100%. Can I do this now? Now we've got something interesting. It's not 40 pixels, it's grown, but the great thing about this is if I reduce it, so does the size of my text, which means it'll work across browsers. And this is my solution, my friends. Okay? We have to get there. I have to get you there to understand. So if you don't understand where our canvas is, who cares how we draw, right? So don't worry about the pixel size right now. I'm making a relative pixel of 40 pixels, but it's based on the actual canvas size itself. It's gonna stretch and squash according to that size. Okay, cool. So I've put it here. I want to move it to the middle of my stage, right? How do I do that? And here's a problem. My problem is that it's my hello world. It's the top left corner of my hello world that's being accessed. That's my pivot point, my top left corner of my hello world, right? So I start counting from here. And if I move it over to the middle, that means it's going to start from here, right? Well, let's change my pivot point for my hello world so that's in the middle of my hello world, right? Let's change that. And there's a create.js method of doing that. So I'm going to go back to app.js, right? And in my app.js, I want to say something like this. Here's my hello label. In my hello label, what I want to say is, let's take the hello label and say my registration point for my x coordinate, right, is equal to my hello label. This is just built into create.js, by the way. So if you don't worry about remembering this, you can use it because it's just in the API documentation. I want to do something like this: get measured height, or measure width. Get measured width, right, of my whole hello label. So it's going to calculate the number of pixels in my label, right? It's not the width as in 40 pixels. It's the number of pixels that's going to be displayed on the stage, okay? And then I'm going to multiply that by 0.5, means half the width. Take half the width of the label and put my first registration point for the x coordinate, right? And now I want to move it down to the middle of my object. So I'm going to do the same thing for my y, hello label.reg_y, the y registration point, and then set up my get measured height. It's another method that exists for create.js, part of our API library, right? And now what I'm doing is, I'll leave it like this. I'm not going to move it around yet. I want you to see what the effect is. So here's where it was originally. Where do you think it's going to be now when I move the registration point to the middle? So this part is going to be up here. Watch. Right? Because I've changed the pivot point from the top left corner of my text object to the middle of my text object, approximately. And that's the middle now. But now that I have control of the middle, I can move that anywhere on the stage I want based on stage width, right? Middle, like right here. Correct. Correct. Right. So it's almost like a pivot point. And in Fireworks, it also has the same thing. Fireworks, Photoshop, Illustrator, it has almost like a pivot point or whatever. My pivot point normally by default, top left corner of every object. But in this particular case, we're making the pivot point the middle of the object. Okay. So we want to move this somewhere in the middle of our screen. So how do we do that? So we're going to say, well, our hello label .x, the x coordinate, starting at the top left corner of our screen, the x coordinate of our label is going to be equal to the width of our stage, right? So stage width, right? And remember, this is an issue here because it's not just the stage width, but the canvas width is what I'm looking at, which is the inner width, whatever the inner width is that I mentioned. Notice that I have my canvas width up here, which is the window.inner width times 0.8, right? That's the size of my whole canvas. And I want to take this and multiply it by 0.5, which means our window.inner width times 0.4, roughly, right? And that's what I'm looking at. That's the size of my where my x component is going to be. So it's going to be window.inner width multiplied by 0.4. Let's see how that works. That's just my x coordinate. All right. X coordinate and y coordinate is where I put it. Where am I positioning it physically? Absolutely on the stage. Where am I moving around my text object? So fresh. It's right there. And so all I've done is I've taken the size of my stage, and I've cut it in half, and I said take the x coordinate, the coordinate of this object, and move it to the middle. And now I want to move this to the middle of the height of my object. Now I know that I've made this a fixed number, 480, which means it's going to be, my y component is going to be 240. That's pretty simple. So I'm going to say hello label dot y is equal to window dot inner height. Oh, I'll be okay. 480, so 240. Sorry, I was going to make it half the height. No, don't do that. Right? I mean, it's okay. If you're being responsive, that's the way it should be, right? Window.inner inner height. But for now, we made it a fixed width, and there's a reason for that. Fixed height. There's a reason for this. All right, refresh. So this is the middle of my approximate middle of my whole stage, right? So I've moved my hello label from the top left corner to the middle. Cool. Now I want it to spin around, right? What? Spin around? What do you mean? How do I make this thing spin? I can't make it spin this way, because that's like 3 dimensions, but I can make it spin around its axis, which is its pivot point, which is the middle, right? But I have a problem, because my hello label has only been declared inside my main function. So I don't have access to it from a scope perspective outside of this function. It's going to be a problem. So I need to make it a global object, right, in order for me to do that. So go back up to my global variables, and I'm not going to just declare my stage, but I'm also going to declare my hello label. So var hello label. And I'm just going to make it just like that, just like with nothing in it. And I could declare it as nothing right now. I could say it's my hello label is null, right? Whatever. Give it some kind of value to give it a presence inside your global namespace. But now what I'm going to do is inside my main, I'm taking my hello label and I'm attaching it to the create.js text object. Cool. Now that I've done that, right, I can access it here in my stage. And I want to do it before my stage updates. I want to do something like this. So inside of my animation loop, I want to say something like this. Hello label, right, dot, and this is something you need to remember or look at the API documentation, dot rotation plus equals to 1, let's say. Okay. So if I look at my rotation, and if I go back to my text is an object, right? So if I go back to my API documentation for a second to understand that, and if I look at my text object, which is I'm looking at right now, here's my text class, it extends the display object class, and display object extends the object class, and so on. Notice that I have x and y coordinates for my objects inside this 2-dimensional space, right? That's what I'm doing. Now, each of my objects, if I look at my properties, here's all the properties of my text that are inherited, right? So color, I can do cursor, the type of cursor that goes over my text, the filters, the font. I can specify all this stuff afterwards, after I declare my text, my ID, my line height, my line width. I can specify these things, mask, and so on. And if I keep going down, there's other things. Regex wedge y tells you what these things are, regex wedge y. And also rotation, which is actually the rotation degrees for this display object, right? That's what it says. So if I add to the rotation starts off at 0, right? So the rotation is 0. And what I'm actually doing is saying change the rotation 1 degree every frame. How many degrees is it going to rotate every second? 60 degrees a second. So it's actually going to spin around quite quickly, right? So let's check this out. Again, this is like basic math 101. Slower. Yeah, let's try it out. So let's refresh. And you can see now that the hello world is rotating roughly around its center. Okay, now it's pretty slow, but it's around 60 degrees every second. Okay, let's make it go crazy quick. Let's make it 5 times the speed and see if it affects us in any way. So I'm going to go back to this. And instead of 1, so 1 degree at a time. By the way, plus equals is a shorthand for saying is equal to hello label.rotation is equal to hello label.rotation plus 1, right? You can also do hello label.rotation plus plus, which is just adding 1 degree every single time, right? But let's add 5, right? So say 5 degrees, which times 60 is 300 degrees, right? As an example, every second, almost a full turn, right? Let's see the difference, right? So you can see how that goes, right? Okay, cool. What about if I wanted to move up and down? Like I wanted to move up and down a certain amount, right? So I wanted to move like, or left and right. I wanted to kind of move left and right, the whole thing. I want to change my x coordinate, and I want to check when the x coordinate of the screen, right, goes to the edge here, it's going to go bounce the other way. And it's going to go to this side, and it's going to keep bouncing one way or the other. How do I do that? Is there a way, right? It's math again. It's going back to math. I know it's not everyone's amazing subject, right? But let's go back here and calculate this for a second. So what I'm saying is inside my animation loop, fine, I can rotate it. But what I want to really do is move it to the right. How do I move it to the right? Well, I change the x number. So the number that and what I'm doing is I want to move it to the right. So if I want to move it to the right, I do one of these. I say hello label dot x plus equals to, let's say, one pixel per frame. So that's 60 pixels in a second. 60 pixels is quite far because this whole thing is about 40 pixels in height. You're going to see it's going to move quite quickly aside, right? Let's see how this works. Refresh, right? And it's going to move it, pretty fast, way over to the side, right? And it's going to get to the point where it's off screen. Hey, it's off screen. Does it still exist? It does. I want to mention this because even though it's off screen, my object's still off screen. It still exists in the world, the two-dimensional world we've created. I want you to think about it as an unlimited world of coordinates, right? An infinite universe, a pocket dimension, all right, that exists in our coordinate space, right? It's unlimited. It goes on forever and ever until your computer crashes. Yeah. Anything off the canvas? So I want you to see your canvas. That's a good point. So I want you to see your canvas as your viewport. Okay. Anything that I can see in my camera. All right. So my camera is looking flat on to my canvas. Anything that's off the canvas is out of the camera view, and therefore I can't see it. But it's still being drawn somewhere else. It's still being rendered. It's still something's still going on off screen. Right. I want to bring it back. Right. I want to say, hey man, don't just go off screen. I want you to hit the boundary, my right bounds, and come back. Right. So that's cool. I want to say, well, here's my statement, if my hello label dot x coordinate is greater than the screen width, which is, what's my screen width? It's window dot inner width times 80%, right? By the way, I could have made it, I should probably make that, if I'm smart, I want to reuse that number over and over again. I want to make this a variable that I kind of access, right? So variable screen width, right, is equal to this. Actually, you can call this canvas width or stage width or whatever you want to call it. So X out of this, put it over here. We'll call this screen width for now, right? And what I'll put is here is screen width. And that means I can reuse this variable over and over again instead of having to do this, put all this stuff in over and over again, right? So screen width is good. If I use screen width here, I might as well use it down here in my calculations, right? So instead of my window.inner width times 4.4, what I really mean is my screen width, which makes more sense too, by the way. My screen width, my screen width times 0.5 is what I really want to say. So half the screen width is what I want to put it in, right? That makes more sense as a human readability perspective, right? When you look at it, we go, oh, I understand what screen width times 0.5, half the screen width. So that means if it's greater than the screen width, right, then what do I want to do? If it's greater than or equal to, by the way, greater than or equal to the screen width, then what I want to do is I want to subtract go this way, go to the right, or go to the left. So I want to say hello label, right? Hello label minus equal to 1. Hello label to x. For now. And if then I got to make another condition, say, well, if it's less than the string width, otherwise go the other way, right? Kind of stuff, right? Well, I got to be careful there because I want to say that I want to start going to the left, right? And then when I go to the left, I want to hit the left bounds. And if my left bounds are being hit, then I want to go the other way, right? So if it's less than the other way, then go that way. Right? So let's just do that one. So I'll say if hello label x is less than or equal to 0, right? Because 0 is where the width starts. It starts from 0. We start counting at 0 and go to the width of the screen, right? Then what I want to do is I want to say, well, hello label dot x is plus equal to 1. Well, plus equal and minus equal. That's really weird. I want to always add something. And it's almost like I want to add or multiply instead of subtracting. Well, what I really want to say is this. When I hit the right side, multiply my hello label object by -1. Just flip the multiplier, right? How do I do that? Well, that means instead of having a value here like 1, right, I'm going to have a movement, like hello label movement of variable, right? And I can do that by declaring a movement variable at the top of my object, right? Please bear with me while I do this so that you don't. So variable, we'll call this thing, actually we'll put it next to the hello label on here, doesn't matter. Hello label move, we'll set it to 1, bear with me, right? And then in here, right inside my motion, I'm going to say hello label plus equals to hello label, right? Move. So there's my hello label move. And what I want to do is, I want this to be positive or negative depending on which way it's going. So when I hit one way, when it's greater, I want to multiply my hello label move by -1, right? And I want to do it again when it hits the other bounds. Every time I hit one bound or the other, I want to multiply the hello label move by -1. So I want to do something like this. I want to say hello label move, right, times -1. So that's what it is. So it's times equal to -1. Now I do the same thing on the other side. Well, kind of duplicating, but don't worry. We can always combine these two. All right, so I want to do either this condition or that condition. Oh man, either or. I can combine that into one single condition in a second. Let me just do this first. Test it this way first. And then, because it's the same thing we're testing, right? So let's try this out. Fresh. It's moving to the right. And what I'm hoping is when it hits the right, it's going to start going to the left, right? Let's see what happens. And then hopefully it's going to bounce around over and over again. And here it goes, right? It's going to keep going forever. Let's see if it works on the left side. It worked on the right side. It's going quite slow. Right? Yeah, let's try it. So let's go to my numbers, which are up here, right? So this is my hello level move. Let's make it 5. I could multiply. I could put a multiplier in there as well. Let's refresh. So there we go. It's a little bit faster, right? So I can make it that way too. Let's see if it works the other way, and I keep bouncing around, right? Forever, right? Along. So let's make it so we can make it so it's one line. Let's fix up our code so that we can use one line to say either or condition is true, right? So how do we do that in our code? So instead of all these lines, want to do it in one line. So what's the or? Or is the pipe statement, double pipe. And I want to take this, or hello label is less than equal to whatever. So we'll take this up, put it up here. And okay, this is interesting. It's this expression expected. So or if, right? If hello label is equal to this, or hello label is less than or equal to that. And what I want to do is put this all in parentheses like this, right? To make it all work properly. And we can get rid of this. Either way, you're multiplying by -1, right? So you might as well make it all in one statement. All I'm doing is saying is two things. And this is just an example of or. If I wanted to make it and, both have to be true, right? union instead of intersection, right? So this is the, sorry, the other way around, intersection instead of union. This is union. This is both either one or the other can be true, and that's the total set of options, right? Let's see if this works. So refresh and see if it kills our code. No, it doesn't, right? Okay, cool. I like this, right? I like this, but I also want it to move up and down, right? Because I'm just not satisfied with this, how this thing moves, right? Oh yeah, this is how we used to do it. This is what I used to do, man. Same. Yeah, same. Now, this is like a really stupid hello world example, but yeah, we can make this hello world clickable. I could change the colors. I can modify the text. I can modify the context. I could spin it in a 3D perspective. Just the whole world clickable. Yes, I can make it clickable, right? Let's do it. Here. I'll make it so that when I click on hello world, here's my hello label, right? I'll set up an event listener for my this is how powerful this tool is that I'm showing you, right? So we've added it to the screen, and I want to make it clickable because you're saying, let's make it clickable, Tom. Let's do it. So just because you're telling me, right? So hello label dot add event listener. Instead of add listener, let's make it on. That's the short code for it. On. And what I want to do with on is I want to say something like this: on click. I want to do something like an internal function, like an anonymous function, right? Here's my anonymous functions. When I click on the label, let's change the label text to something else. Clicked, right? Let's try that. It's going to be weird though because clicked is a different size, and we've measured the length of the label. Remember, it's not a text object. I'll show you what it does. You don't see the effects yet until you see it, right? So when I click onto it, I want to change the text, hello label.text. I want to change this to clicked. When I click onto it, as it moves, by the way. Try doing this with CSS. Okay? So clicked, refresh, go back here and refresh. So it's moving, and then I want to click onto it, see if I can get it. Oh. See, it's hard to get it, right? Because, oh, there it is. Now what's the problem? Look how it spins kind of weirdly, right? Because it still has the old registration point of the last object that was there, right? No, it actually pre-measured everything, right? I pre-measured it as hello world, and hello world's much larger than clicked, right? So it's using that registration point. So what I need to do is measure it again, right? So when I click on the object, change the text to clicked, and change the registration point as well. So let's do something like hello label dot regex, right, is equal to hello label dot get measured width and height. Let's just do this whole thing. Let's copy and paste. Now, if we do this, I can probably make a function for it, which I'm not going to do right now, just from a space perspective. I'm going to call this same thing again. It means if I'm calling it twice, I could make a measure thing that says measure the label, right? Measure hello label, and that'll be my method that I call every single time I do this kind of stuff, instead of me doing these two lines again and again. If that's true, and if I refresh, it's hello world. And see if I can click onto it before it goes away. There's click now. It's spinning in the middle. See? So we have total control. The great thing about this little this library is Create.js gives us total control of our objects. This is not a text object, or it's not a font. It's not something that I'm typing with like inside of an HTML element. All right. This is not a text node in my object. If I ever tried to access this thing, I'll never see it. It's not going to be inside my code, right? It's inside of it lives and dies inside this canvas. It doesn't exist outside of this canvas. And if I can do this, I can put bitmaps, I can add sounds, I can do whatever I want. Hey, I'm saying I'm going to add a bitmap, right? I can add whatever I want. Before we end, let's add a bitmap, right? Yeah, JPEG, ping, any image you want, right? So let's add something. Let's grab I don't know, something like instead of this object here, I want to kind of go with the object, and we'll give it a button to click, a button image that goes behind the clicked or the hello world, right? Let's try this out. More tricky, but still not undoable. Okay? So what I want to do is I want to go and say button image, and we're going to go and see some images for buttons, right? Let's make something that's kind of like this, something round that makes sense, or I don't know, you choose something like this. Makes no sense, right? Because it's not flat, right? We're looking at a 2D world. If you did it this way, it'd be more challenging too, because it has shadows built in and everything else. Something flat like this might be okay though. So let's pick this one. You can pick whatever one you want. I'm going to save this image as an object that I'm going to put inside my project, right? So there's COMP1073. I'm going to drop it right into lesson 12. Notice that I don't have a space for it. I need a space for it, so new folder. I'm going to call this folder assets. Inside my assets folder, I'll create another place called images. That's how we do it. And I'm going to drag this option, instead of being called 13.jpg, we're just going to call it button.jpg. Here it is, a button. Now, my button, I have a problem. My button has this white space around it. And what I really want to do is make it a ping image, right? Because otherwise my button is going to show white everywhere. Luckily, my background for my canvas right now is white, so you're not going to see anything. But eventually what I want to do is I want to get rid of this and give me that transparency that I want with a ping image, right? So let's do this just as is first. Or I could do it, I can convert it to an SVG, no problem. So if I do this, I need something else in my main. I got my hello label, that's cool, right? And I got my hello label.on, that's kind of cool too, but I want to click on my button instead of this, and I want to create a button. Well, I want to make, if I want to have it access, I want to have it spin around and all that kind of stuff, or move around, I want to kind of declare it here in the global namespace. So I want to say var, button, let's call it button, right? I will make that equal to null, just give it some kind of presence, right? And we're also going to give it a button move, right? So var button move, make it equal to the same as the label. You don't have to, right? And I'll change that afterwards, right? Here's my button move. You see how we're duplicating, and duplicating means methods or functions we can create, right? But what I want to do in here is I want to create a button. So I'll do something like this. I'll say button is equal to new, create.js.bitmap. Okay, now Bitmap is still part of the API. Remember, we're talking about APIs this week. This is what it's all about, right? So if I go back to my create.js, EZO.js API, right now I'm looking at the text class. I want to look at the Bitmap class. Here it is. And notice how I have this way of doing things. So I need the path to the image. Here's my image path. That's what I got to put in here. So it's got to be the exact image path, right? Whatever it is. So be careful here, or else you'll get something weird, right? So let's take a look at that. So if I go buttons equals create.js bitmap, and then inside there the image or URL path, right? So how do I do that? I want to kind of put in here the path to the image. Now I know I'm inside app.js, so if I want to find the image path, I got to go up one to scripts. This is the main path. Down one into assets, and another one into images, because it exists in image assets images button.jpg. So that's what I got to do. So this is my path. So I got to go up one to the root because I'm inside scripts. Now I'm on the root, down one to assets, down another one to images, and down into that thing that's called button.jpg. Right, so that's the path to my button, where I'm sitting right now. Okay, so I've got my path, my button, cool. My width, by the way, my registration point for my button is the top left corner of the screen. So I got to do the same thing. I'll say button.regex is equal to whatever now it's a different function. Instead of get measured width, it's not like that. It's button dot get bounds. And you can't see it right now, but it actually does exist. Get bounds, and my and dot width. Sorry for the code hinting. So button.getBounds.width, that's the width of my object, right? Multiplied by 0.5, so half the width of the object, right? And button.regY, I don't even know how big this button is, by the way. It could be massive, right? So I got to be really careful. Is equal to button.getBounds.height. Oops. I'll show you this part of the API. I remember this because I use it. But if you want to know where this is, again, if you look at the properties, you can see that there are a number of different properties, but there's also some really cool methods that are built in, like add event listener, cache, clone, dispatch event, so on. And there's other ones. If I kind of scoot down here, right? So and one of them is get bounds, right? So here's get bounds, right? Get bounds. And get bounds, what I can do is from a bitmap, it returns the width and height of the source rectangle. That's what it's giving me. And even though my object is round, a button, it actually bounds everything in a rectangle because that's how computers can see stuff. It doesn't see stuff in circles. The computer sees things in squares or rectangles, right? So because of that, the top left corner of my bitmap is where it starts off, and I want to change the registration point to the middle of the button, which is exactly what I've done before with the text object. That's what this does. It's just a different method. So for text objects, we use getMeasuredWidth or height, and for bitmap objects, images, we use getBounds, and we specify the width or height parameter of the bound that we get. Okay, because we get the bounds of both the width and the height at the same time, okay? And then what I want to do is I want to say something like this. My button.x coordinate is going to be the screen width in the middle. So let's put this in the middle. So screen width, right, times 0.5, same as above. Notice there's a lot of duplication here. Button.y is equal to 240. And I want to add the button to the stage. There's my button. Okay, now my button's not going to move around yet. But I want to put it on the stage so you can see it. Maybe it's going to be massive. We have to rescale this thing a little bit. So let's try this out. So we're going to go back to our moving object. And let's take a look at it. It's still here. Refresh. Oh, man, where's our button image? How come it's not coming out? Inspect. And this is where we start doing our troubleshooting. Type error, cannot read property width of no, right? And the reason why I can't read the button width right here is because even though I'm used the getBounds object, here's button, new, create.js, bitmap, and so on, I don't have a value for this yet, my registration value. Even though I've tried to get it, I've just created it right here, right? That's all I'm doing, right? So if that's true, let's just hover these up for a second. It's just showing you what the problem would be, right? And if I do this and I go back here and refresh, I see my button's massive. And here's a problem. It's like way down here, right? Because this is the corner of the button. Even though, see, you can actually see it. Look, it actually goes behind. Look. It all depends. Here's another thing to know about create.js and the stage, right? The create.js object, when I create objects and I put them onto the stage, they layer in how I add them on, in the order of how I add them. So I added my label first. That means it's going to be behind my button. If I added my button first, it would be behind my label. Let's show you that. So here's my button. I'm going to fix this problem in a second. Cut this out and put it up before my label. Declare it here and add it in. Right? Let's just reformat that. It's massive. It's too big. My button I chose was too big. I want to fix that because it's massive. And I can scale it, right? Let's say half the scale. You want to try and do this outside this code, right? But if I want to, I can kind of do it like this. I can say button.scale scale x is equal to 0.5, if I'm not wrong. And button.scale y is also equal to 0.5. Okay? Let's see if that works. So refresh, smaller, right? The scale x and scale y. I can reassign. Notice that the button now is behind the label because I put it in place first. Because I added my hello world after my button, it appears after it, right? So it's in additive order. So as I add it in, as I push this onto the display list, this goes first, then this displays after. And that's what creates the layering effect. Now, if I have layers, I can make wonderful pictures and wonderful artwork by layering one thing behind the other. For example, if you make your ad, which we're going to try and make an ad, the background of the ad can have a background, right, that does something, and the front of the ad can have text and buttons and everything else, right? And you can do that by layering things in order. Okay, still got a problem with my button being in the middle, right? So why isn't this button regx value and regy value working? Well, I spelled regx wrong, right? And I didn't get code hinting. Remember I talked about code hinting, how important it is? Let's try this out. Fresh, this exact center. Okay, now we've got it in the center. I want it to smooth along, rotate along with hello world, right? So now that we've got our button here in the center, remember I got to go into my animation loop and do something the same way. I want to do something. I don't want to rotate it, but I definitely want my my button to move along with my label. And I don't have to do it this way. I can say button.x plus equals to my button move, right? And I can say something like the same as what I did before. I could say button move times equals to -1. Keep it in line, to keep it hovering along or moving along with my hello label. right? I'm doing this in the animation loop. This happens every frame. This is where the animation happens. This is why I call it animation loop. If you want to move things around, you got to make it global, and it's got to be accessible in the animation loop. Okay? Yes. I could too. I could say that button X is equal to label hello label X. But let's try it this way first, and then I'll do your way. Right? I like your thinking. That's right thinking, actually. Refresh. Right? Now there's a problem, right? Notice how it's a little bit off, right? Well, my button's staying still. It's not rotating, right? Because I didn't make my button rotate. I made my button stay still, right? I didn't rotate it. I have to do one of these to rotate the button, right? So I can do one of these. Button dot rotation, right? Is plus equal to 5. That's the standard rotation rate. Fresh. Now you can see that the whole thing is moving, right? So it looks a little bit, looks the same. It's still not quite center, but that could be an effect of the difference between measuring height and width with text as opposed to measuring height and width with the actual button image itself. Look at it's a little bit jerky too. Do you notice the jerkiness of it? This is system dependent, people, right? System dependent. Okay, let's try it out. So if I've got this button rotating left and right now, it's an image. Let's be able, I want to click the button. I don't want to click on the hello world because hello world's harder to click on than the button, right? Okay, cool, so let's do that. Let's change that around. So instead of hello label dot on, I want to make it so that the button gets clicked. I don't need to do any of this stuff anymore, but I do need to do this, right? So when I click on the button, it does all this stuff, not the hello label itself. So I'll say button dot on click, then do this. Let's try it out. Refresh. If I click on the button's easier to track, right? So clicked, no problem, right? Because it's a big button. It's still kind of weird, right? And it's kind of, you know, it doesn't look right, right? That's one. How about if I wanted to make my label have a background? You know, I can do that too. I can make my label have a background, make it a little bit opaque, so it gives me a little bit of thing. I could do that too. I can make my background image more. I can change the opacity by using the opacity. There's a lot of properties that these buttons and text objects have that you can mess around with, but you have to look at the API documentation for this. Okay, so spinning around my button is cool, but one thing I notice is that I don't get any kind of feedback. So when I hover over my button, I got nothing, right? But I want to make it, in order for me to use any kind of button effects, I have to change it at the stage level, right? So when I declare my stage, I got to do something like this. Stage dot button. Mouse. Enable mouse over. 20. Right? If I don't do this, so enable mouse over effects for all buttons. Now this is a problem. This takes up, the reason why it's not enabled by default is because it takes up a lot of cycles, right? It takes up actually, it's a little bit of overhead that this poses for you. So if you allow buttons on your stage to be hovered over and have a hover effect, hover event, then it takes effort. So don't recommend you do it this way at all. It's better for you to not do it this way unless you really need to. Okay, let's try this out. So what I want to do is I want to hover over this thing and change the opacity of the button to, when I hover over, it's going to go 0.8, so 20% transparent. And when I hover off it, it's going to go back to 100% opaque, right? Let's try this out. How do I do that? It's 2 more events, right? My button on. We'll say mouse over. On mouse over event, what I want to do is I want to say something like this inside here. And this is a challenge. Do I have access to my button? Yes, I do. Button dot opacity is equal to 0.8. Oh, yeah. And then what I want to do on mouse out is my button opacity is going to be back to 1. Right? So 80% or 100%. Right? Let's try this out. If it's opacity, is opacity right or is it alpha? I can't remember what it is. Refresh. It's not that. It's not opacity. Let's try alpha. I think it's alpha. Alpha transparency. Right? So I get a kind of an effect. When I hover over the button, it's kind of hard to see, but when I hover over the button, if I want to make it more dramatic, what did I do? Inspect. Something I did, I broke it. Cannot read property width of null. Why? I broke it. Something else broke it. Something else broke it. Let's just kick off that thing again. Sorry, it's my server is also something that I have to rerun. Yeah, well, sometimes it needs to be rerun, right? And otherwise you won't see it. So now you see it's much more dramatic, right? So when I hover over it, now look how it kind of stutters when I do it, because it takes a lot of overhead for me to do button effects like this. But the great thing is you can create whatever button, however you want it to look, and respond to events in real time here with your stuff. Okay, so later today, I'm going to put together a little assignment for you guys. And this is the assignment piece. I want you to make a banner ad, right, where you can put any images you want in the background, right, by loading up an image like I showed you. I want you to do a little research, not too much, about your API documentation for Create.js, okay? And the banner ad is going to be small. It's not going to be massive like this, right? And all I want you to do is have a little bit of text, right, that blinks, okay? So that's all it needs to do. A little bit of text that blinks, right, that's adding in that says, click here, right? And when you click anywhere on the banner, which means you can click the background image with an on event, right, whatever, it's going to take you to another page, because that's what banner ads do, right? To take you to another page, right? So I want you to make a little banner ad. It could be different sizes. You could make one that looks like this, like a banner this way, or you can make it so it's more of something that goes up and down, right? And you could pick anything that your great portfolio, right? You want to advertise. You want to go to your project. So click here for the projects, and you make some kind of spinning that makes it that you attract the user to this. Now it's kind of annoying when you see ads like this, but still, advertising and using Create.js or some kind of flash-like thing to create an effect that gets you to click here is still very effective, right? Questions around this? What we've done today? Yeah. No. Good luck. You can use WebGL. That's the other way you can do it. You don't have to use this. You can use WebGL, but WebGL is much more complex, right? You could also don't have to use Create.js. Create.js is just a library to help us with Canvas. It's a helper library, right? You can do strict Canvas by itself with JavaScript. I don't recommend it. It's too long. You can rotate stuff, but just to do what I'm doing here, a button that clicks, that rotates, that moves around, that does stuff like this in a specific space, good luck. It's really hard. Much harder to do, right? Absolutely. Yeah. So any questions around this stuff? I know that there's a lot here, right? And we're going to do this. I'm going to still review things next week again because we're going to talk about it. Hey, here's a question: is your API stuff, like using Create.js to do something with whatever, is it due on your final exam? Absolutely not. It's just for your assignment, okay? Because it's too much to know. If I had you all semester, yes, I would put it on your final exam. I don't have this. I can't do one API for one day and put it on the exam, the next day. It's too much. You would never get it. It's too much. Unless I gave you all the code and then said modify it. And that sometimes it's even harder because exactly. So let's just not do that. I just want you to do one assignment with an API. It's going to be worth a little bit of marks, 10 to 15% of your final mark. All the details for your assignment are going to be up online later on today. And it'll be due not next week, but the final week of classes. Okay, next week we'll just do a review week. Okay, and a marking week. Any questions around this stuff that I haven't covered? Let's push it to GitHub. And guys, I'll see you next week. Thank you very much.